Hi, I'm Eva. I'm a preservation specialist with NEDCC. This is the talk we're going to do now. So if you don't know NEDCC, Northeast Document Conservation Center, we are the oldest, largest regional conservation center in the United States. There used to be like a bunch of us. I'm already fussing with the mic. A lot of regional conservation centers. Now there's just a few of us. We are not just Northeast, we're international. It's not just documents, we do audio and photos. I'm not a conservator. So it's a historic name, but we are proud to be part of it still. I'm in preservation services particularly, so we do outreach, education, conferences, assessments. I'll come mediate a meeting. I'll write a grant for you. We're funded by the NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. So we're here to be a resource. Anyone can call or email with questions all of the time. So that's us. Who are you guys? There's like 11 of you. So I think we can just get real personal here. This is my first ATALM. Are you guys, any of you librarians? One. There we go. There's our knowledge expert in the back. Archivist? Yeah, okay, a couple. Records managers? Yeah, ish. Some of us may be all these things, and that's totally fine. That's really normal. Educators? Or outreach coordinators? THPOs? That's what I say. Do you guys say THP? That's what I say. TIPO? Oh, TIPO. We were talking about this yesterday. I do speak fluent library acronyms, so that's fine. We can say TIPO. I'll try to explain the ones that I say. Anybody here already doing outreach and training? Yeah? Do you want to tell us about it?
We're working with Boogadoo, and we've been doing outreach with the dressmakers of our community.
Oh, cool.
Tribe. We have them doing Boogadoo Global.
Uh-huh.
Students and mentors. And then we're also doing collections for the community level where we're asking the community to bring their collections located to digitize.
Oh, that's awesome. That is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Like, you can just go. That was perfect. Anybody else doing any kind of outreach? And it could just be a standalone event, or it could be like you guys do webinars or something. Are you guys attending events like that in your community? Ish? Okay. I also got a really awesome cold this week, so just pardon me in advance for all of the lozenges and water that I'll be imbibing during this talk. Final question. Anyone here part of like a local consortium or a preservation network? It could be more formal or less formal, but just any kind of regional partnerships that you're part of? Interesting. Okay. That's something I'm going to be talking about also. It's something I really care about, and we see a lot of activity around kind of local, regional efforts. Funders like to see them. A lot of our funders are walking around outside. I've noticed a lot of the big federal funders are here. They're lurking, so you should try to find them, corner them, ask them questions. They actually like that. Okay, so that's kind of helping me out to get a sense about you guys. I would rather keep this a little bit more discussional, so don't hold back with questions. If you want a copy of the slides, you want to get in touch with me, my card is in the back. I also put some different handouts back there, some resources. We are basically like a really specific yellow pages. If you're looking for an answer to a question, call me, let me help you Google it, let me help you find a vendor. It's what we're good at. It's why the federal government keeps the lights on. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about today. It's only an hour, and these things tend to go fast. So I want to just go through some core ideas to get us started. I think there's actually a couple of sessions here. We're seeing a trend of sessions about how to do kind of outreach, some good case studies, first-person examples. So we've seen some other talks already today and tomorrow. So hopefully you guys are kind of seeing the trend. I think the most successful way to promote preservation, to talk about collections care, is through training, through outreach, through in-person events. So I'm going to focus on that today. Can you guys hear me okay and everything? All right. I mean, I'm tempted to like come out with the mic and just kind of hang out down here, but if you can't see me, let me know. So, was that just in there twice? Okay. So we're here to talk about how we can encourage our community to get interested in preservation and collections care, right? We want to share some concepts of collection stewardship, share some vocabulary around that. These are kind of our goals, I think. Education in order to protect our historic assets, I think, is the general theme. But the real goal of those activities, beyond sort of education and bettering our neighbors, is definitely a way to protect our history. I think that the bigger point here is to actually find those artifacts, find the documents, put the education and the awareness out there so they're getting preserved. We want to seek out the carriers of our unique histories, our unique voices from whether it's your community or your company or your school, and sort of save them, move them forward, right? Making things available for new use is always a long-term goal. We may have a certain idea of how we value something now, how we think it's, this is historic or this is important. Those ideas will change as, as the community changes, as time passes. So we want to make sure they're still available. In order to do that, we need to create useful, accessible, successful learning opportunities. So that's what I'm gonna kind of get at here today. And I think that's going to really rely on the knowledge of your own community or your own organization. So the onus is on you, the organizer, to find out what's the best fit. So we're talking sort of about our logistics, but it's going to really be from a personal point of view. Next obvious step is to think about who we're trying to reach, who do we want to include or interview or sort of bring into our practice. There may be a specific piece of your community that you're focused on, like students or veterans. You may be specifically working on looking for people outside the tribe or in a different neighborhood or another tribe that's 2 states away that has a similar pattern about something. So we're looking for both our known users and new potential users. This is the question we'll probably be talking the most about today. What are you trying to set up? How will you be packaging this outreach and this training? Are you interested in setting up workshops or lectures or hands-on demonstrations? Or are you thinking more about creating a tool set, a publication, maybe something that's kind of you designed for your community, then you put out into the world and it has its own life out there? So different kind of approaches. We're lucky now, right? We have this whole new digital tool set. It's not just in person or mailing out flyers. Those work too, but we have this added bonus of adding a digital component or an online component. I think figuring out your presentation will depend a lot on knowing who your audience is and how to reach them. So if your public library has like a monthly lecture series and there's a room that on Saturday nights they project movies, but they'll also let you use it for a workshop, that's a great entree right there. We've held meetings at like quarterly tribal council meetings. That's another guaranteed audience and sort of information distribution point, you could say. So we'll talk a little about that too. I'm going to just drink like many gallons of water here. And this is the logical aspect here. How are we actually going to pull off an event or a tool set? Who's involved? Who's in charge of it? Who's funding it is the big question, really. Where's it going to be held? The scheduling, all of that. All important planning aspects, so I think that's why we treat it like a project. We don't want it to sort of be like, oh, well, Saturday we'll have a meeting and get some tables set up. This should be a managed project with scope and goals and timeline from the outset. I'm big on sort of project management and collection management in general, so we're going to use that framework here. I do think that knowing, it can feel kind of like a self-research project ahead of time. Who are we? Who are we trying to educate? What are our goals? But doing that work ahead of time, sort of, it's a guarantee for your audience, for your users, so you're going to have a more effective, useful experience. It'll give you something to build on. So it's really worth that extra effort at the beginning. So finally, I want to think about, just in this beginning section, of the idea of having partnerships. And my first question there about, is anyone here involved in local networks or consortia, is a very leading question. We want to bring in partners to help support our argument, to bring in their knowledge. Whether you're hiring a consultant, whether it's someone from the outside community who's trained in education, training in event planning, Or you're using a local expert. Maybe there's a local museum or the librarian has an interest in preservation. Maybe someone's done an oral history project. They want to help you bring that into your community. I do think there's really great value in using a local partner. They're going to have better buy-in sometimes with your patrons. They might have a better sensibility of a tone, and it can be easier, sort of more empathetic, I'd say, with a local expert, a familiar face. I mentioned this briefly also, the idea of looking for partners in terms of funding and project planning, and it may be the public library, it may be a local university, it may be the next town over, the next tribe over, but looking for people who have shared goals and shared needs can be helpful. You don't have to do it on your own, but we've seen a lot of interest from our funders looking for projects and ideas that benefit a larger audience. So if you can set up a workshop that's not just for you, but it's for a larger piece of the community, that might have a little bit more sort of appeal to your funders. We also often see collaborative buying projects. It's easier to buy 1,000 plastic sleeves, though it's a better price point, and you split them up amongst 3 different projects, right? Sounds like an office phone. Pause. Okay. So this is kind of a library world thing that we like to think with these regional consortia. Was it anyone interesting? But those collaborative networks is a really good idea. Probably something that you've heard about. You don't have to find an acronymed organization that's running a project that you can then pay dues to. You could just start a local preservation network if you want to. You can call the librarian from the next town or call someone who's in your role in another community and start a conversation. And it can be like an email thing. It could be a meeting once a month. That can be your local preservation network. So if you're looking for partnerships, you can just start them. You can be in charge of them. It does not have to be something that comes down from some organization or like a state entity or something. Those are kind of my opening thoughts. Before I get into logistics, any other thoughts or feelings? We've grown a lot on this side. Oh, hey, hi, what's up?
Are historical
societies? I love them, yes. I think they're great. So your historical societies are a great example of often a volunteer, a non-professional entity merging with professional concerns and practices. They may be, often you have a historical society and a historical commission, right? A historical commission may be a municipal offshoot that gets like some town funding, or they get to use the second floor of the police station or something. And the historical society is in an old house on the other side of town. I will say, speaking from experience, just because you're in one entity and they're in another entity across town, you should still try to work together. I had a phone call from a librarian. Like I was saying, we're federal. Anyone can call and ask us questions, and I'll just talk to you all day on the phone. It's great. I had a librarian call us recently. She's looking to line up a grant application. She is doing some archival kind of organizing, like as a contract for the Historical Commission. But she knows the Historical Society is really in rough shape too. She knows because they share a room on the second floor of the public library. She's looking for funding that would benefit both entities, but they won't talk to each other. They wouldn't have a meeting together. And they're sharing the library space, and it's like, well, you're not gonna get funding to talk about the relative humidity on this side of the room, right? Like it seemed like this really kind of obvious opportunity for collaboration. So we went after it and made them all sit down together, and it was really fun. So your historical society is right in there with all these concerns. And to that point, so are your records managers, your town clerks. Municipal record holders are often people who had careers or training totally separate from like the archives game or a museums game, got elected to a position, and they're dealing with fishing licenses and voting registration and the election coming up. And they also have really old ledgers and important blueprints. They want into this conversation too. So you can have kind of partners lurking around in surprising places. Thank you. Feel free with the questions. That's all I'm open to whatever. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to set up some outreach or training to promote preservation, whether it's in your own organization, in your school, or in a broader, like a community-facing area. Again, I'm a big believer in in-person training. I think that our online tool sets are crucial, I want to engage with users that are farther afield through webinars and through shared resources, but the in-person conversation really goes a long way. It might make people more willing to ask questions, more willing to sort of just stop and chat and find out natural collaborations that could happen. So I brought some resources, and we're happy to get you going digitally, but definitely try for those face-to-face meetings. I think they go a long way. Okay, this is my only clip art, I promise. So like I was saying, there's other related talks today and this week that I think it's really great to have a couple of different viewpoints on these ideas. But since there are a lot of good first-person case studies being presented, I wanted to go a little bit more theoretical to think about how we might approach planning this kind of event. I think, like I was saying, all projects require good project management, good sort of goal structure from the beginning. And we're going to touch on these ideas a little bit as we go through. I left some time for the end because I really do believe that in this kind of settings, hearing each other's ideas of what may have worked or didn't work or questions is really more useful. So hopefully we can end with kind of like a mediated conversation. And if you don't want to, you can just sneak at the back. I won't be offended. But to that point, right off the bat, do you have sort of an inherent sense of what are, okay, preservation, collections care, what are the topics that you would assume would be of interest to your community, to your audience? Does anyone have any ideas right away? Like, if you were going to have a workshop on something, what would it be?
Probably how to care for, we have a lot of families that have recordings on tapes and photos.
Great. Yeah, two big concerns, photographs and magnetic media, audio cassettes. Absolutely. Other ideas? Yeah.
I think I am a ethnology collections manager,
Uh-huh.
and I think that it's important. A lot of people who come in and will say, "Oh, I have like this really cool piece, or I have these really cool pieces," and then they die, and
Yeah.
the history of it's gone. And
Yeah.
so I'm very much an advocate for people keeping their things as long as they want them in their family,
Mm-hmm.
but also
Yeah.
cataloging them to a point where if they die, or if it passes on to somebody else, there's an inventory of that family history, those pieces, that if they do come to the museum, then you have that provenance to go with it.
Yes, absolutely.
Talking to more people about that, 'cause it's very hands-on, and you gotta sit down and like photograph things, and it's
Uh-huh.
the same process, but outside of the museum, in a way that I want to help people like preserve their family history, but also help us in the way of like, well, this is tribal history, we want to have this for the future, and if you want to bring these items to us at some point, then that's already done, and that history is not lost.
Yeah, that's actually an example I have for later on is exactly that sentiment of we want to help people take care of their materials now, but also help our future donors when they bring material to the museum so we know it's in good shape. We have some contextual history about it. It's so important. I think local history should stay local, but we can help people keep it local in a better way, right? Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Other ideas, other topics that you might say, here's something that I would like to teach or learn about, things that you have questions about? Well, I have some ideas. Oh, here, I ruined it. What else do you have?
Preserving baskets,
Absolutely.
also cedar. I saw a 100-year-old cedar mask all on the shelf. Wasn't even that high.
Yeah, artifacts. Our organic artifacts are really sensitive, right? Organic materials like leather and wood are they have these inherent degradation issues, so we know they're not going to last forever. So what do we do to lengthen those lives? Yeah. So here's a couple of ideas that I had. These are topics that we teach around a lot because we get these questions a lot. Right off the bat, archival storage and supplies. Excuse me. That's kind of a basic, broad one. I like to start with that because a lot of that's actually a vocabulary lesson. Archival is not a standardized term. When you see an archival scrapbook kit, it doesn't really mean anything. Whereas like acid-free or lignin-free, those terms scientifically mean something. So doing a little bit of education about what kind of box should I buy? What kind of plastic should I buy? That can go a long way, and it's really easy to transmit to your users. You already know it as a museum professional, but finding a succinct way to pass that around is really great. Digitization, of course, there's always lots of questions about digitizing, whether it's I have lots of digital files, how do I keep track of them, or how do I create a good image? We did a whole workshop yesterday on creating a good image, and it's both harder and easier than it should be, right? We all have, somewhere I have a phone up here, so we all have these really nice, smart computers that we're carrying around, and we're just creating tons of digital content. How do we figure out what of that matters to our own historic record and capture that and transfer it to keep in the long term? That kind of gets into organization also, so this idea of letting people know that they are collectors, they are stewards of history, and they can have pride in that and also have a little bit of education around it and start to maybe do some better things, avoid certain processes, avoid certain products, rubber cement. So that's like an easy place to start. Exhibiting, of course, complicates preservation inherently. The need to exhibit, we are taking our most valuable, interesting things and putting them out into a less controlled environment. That's kind of hard, but we want to do it. That's how we bring in users and scholarship. So thinking about good guidelines around the exhibits, which is really just about environmental control, but and security, I guess. Grant funding we'll be talking about today. Again, there are lots of grant funders walking around out here. We'll talk about that a little bit today at the end. Disaster preparedness, another topic that we've seen several sessions this week about that. Everyone has to know about disaster preparedness. It's just one of those topics. And it can sound really formal, but if you're thinking about tips that could help families in your area or users in your community, I think you can find an inroad to disaster preparedness that's like not about FEMA salvage techniques in a scary way, but in a kind of useful way. When you open a box from the basement, it's all moldy. What do you do? So people feel prepared, not freaked out, not fear-mongering, but just letting them know there are steps to take. And then towards that, salvage methods. What do I do with a wet book? We maintain a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week disaster hotline that anyone can call. I got a phone call this morning from Albion, Michigan. They had a bunch of wet books that they put into the freezer. And I was like, great, that's great. Freeze them. Books do great in the freezer. So I brought some information about that, but you should have that phone number and know that you can call us. The AIC, the American Institute for Conservation, also has a disaster hotline. So if you have wet photographs versus oil paintings versus leather, you can talk to a conservator for free. You can just call them or email them, who will give you guidance around those specific formats. So there are resources out there. This is not a field that's lacking in voluntary information. We love helping each other, too much almost. I think what we're trying to do here is make those resources sort of more easily available to our users. Okay. So once we have a topic sort of figured out for our audience, figuring out what the best format for that is the next step. And again, is it going to be a half-day lecture, a full-day workshop, a webinar, flyers that you just post in the public library? Do you want to do a poster competition and get kids involved somehow? I mean, there's a million ways to get into this. And it's going to depend on your local resources, your existing relationships with schools and communities around you, and the ability to sort of grow new partnerships. Maybe you start by doing a blog post about preservation. Maybe you start by tweeting out from today about this event. That's great. It just kind of gets people talking about it in this way, like, oh yeah, preservation's a thing. I can do this. I'll show some slides in a minute. I think I start a lot of my talks by saying, you are already doing preservation. Like, we're all in this together. Again, looking at existing programming, like at your public library or like at your tribal council, where you know there are incidents or events in place that you could sort of build onto, is a really good way to get started. So choosing your topic and your format may depend quite a lot on who's going to be helping you put this program on. If you have a local museum with a curator who likes to teach, likes doing outreach, find out what they like to talk about, find out what their interests are or a new program they're working on, and see if you can build in a community aspect of that. If you know someone in your community, a volunteer maybe, who's really into photography and has a huge digital photography collection already, maybe they want to talk about it. Maybe they want to let you know how they're scanning their images. And maybe you can help them sort of improve their practice and do it through the means of a half-day workshop. That again uses that local expertise idea I was talking about, where it's not just a stranger who gets flown in, it's someone who's known and therefore maybe has better buy-in. I think it's important to say, I mean, to be realistic with what's going to be useful to your audience. I have been in the situation where I've come in to talk about a certain topic that maybe wasn't actually useful or of interest yet, and we kind of ended up being, I think, in my way, being like, oh, is this boring? Let's talk about something else. And you kind of have to redirect. So know your audience. Again, we started with this idea, but find out what's going to be relevant, that people are going to really come and stay for the whole event. Budget, obviously, sort of the big element we have to worry about. And I'll talk about funding at the end for a second. But I do want to think about considerations that are going to require funding from the get-go. You know, you again might have a meeting room at the VFW hall or at the public library or at the Historical Society. Often, if it's an old structure, they'll let you use the old ballroom or something. That's great. There may be a fee associated. Maybe you're renting chairs and tables. Maybe you're doing a social hour ahead of time. You have to buy coffee and sugar and have a trash can there. I mean, there's a lot of the kind of nitty-gritty logistics to think about. Photocopies. I mean, I've made a lot of photocopies for this trip. Those things add up. So this gets back to our project management kind of stuff, where you're just having some realistic parameters in place before you get going. So the morning of, you're not running around scrambling or realizing, you know, we need another $150 I have to come up with right now. Scheduling seems like a pretty simple aspect, but it's often the hardest part of me setting up a workshop is the scheduling. You know, depending on, are you doing a full day event? Are you doing a half day event? Is it geared towards families? Is it geared towards the members of the city hall? They may prefer a weekday or a Saturday morning. Kind of asking around is okay. You can say, here's what we want to do. This gets back to our research project, right? Here's what we want to do. What time works well for you? So you don't put in all this effort and resources and you have a big event and then no one shows up because they were all at work or something. I did some training for the Micmac Tribe in Maine, and we called around ahead of time, and they let me know that starting at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning is like not a good idea. People have kids, people have practice, so we pushed it back to like an 11 o'clock start. Way better success rate. Other times, we also work with groups who want to build an event, say they already have a meeting set up or an exhibit set up, or they know that, like with the town clerk, November is really busy. So kind of be mindful of people's schedules. There are other kind of parameters and things in their life that are in their own way. You want to get them when they're really ready to talk about this. Location goes back to the format of your event and, again, your audience, right? Are you trying to do outreach specifically to senior citizens? If so, having an event in a building that's really far away on the top floor, you're setting up hurdles, right? Thinking about where people are going to be, how do they get to you? Again, families with young children, do you have the facilities in place to make it a comfortable area so their kids can run around and you've got bathrooms and they can have snacks? If I'm teaching a wet salvage workshop, meaning I've got buckets of water and wet books and wet photographs, I don't want to do it in a carpeted room. I just don't want to. Or a place that has no water. We have to carry the water really far. That has happened. I'm really weak. So just being aware of your location parameters too. I think your choice of venue will affect how big your audience can be, but your topic may affect that as well. If you're doing a hands-on demonstration, yesterday we did 3 different types of scanning and imaging stations. I don't want 50 people in there trying to all use the scanner at the same time. It's not fun for them. It's not good for the equipment. The ideas kind of get lost. So think about, are we doing something hands-on that's really going to need 10 people and 1 instructor or 2 instructors, or is this more of like a lecture and people are going to be talking and it's okay to go a bigger group? That'll lead to your needs for the location as well. And these, again, very nitpicky here. Think about equipment, thinking about chairs, tables, power, internet. Is there someone to unlock the door if it's on the weekend? That has happened, that buildings close on the weekend and it turns out we couldn't get in. Being sensitive to that need for your audience to be comfortable. Are they going to want to bring food and snack? Is that okay? If you're in a museum or an archives, maybe not. Maybe you can't have food and drinks in there, so you have to schedule a break. We'll talk a little bit about the sort of daytime planning. But computer equipment's a big one, speakers, podiums, all of that stuff. Here's sort of my personal sort of checklist when I'm thinking about if I'm writing a talk or I'm thinking about planning a workshop. I want to enjoy it, I want the audience to enjoy it, and I've been doing this job for a couple of years, so starting to think about, adult pedagogy, teaching adults, is hard and really different than teaching kids. Even if this is like not having one person literally on high giving a lecture, but even if it's like just a team working day or a meeting, I think a lot of the rules still apply. Being pretty clear about where we're going, so it's not just like 90 minutes of talking and you have no end in sight. That's boring, it's scary, people are gonna leave. I try to set good rules. Like I said, I'm keeping it pretty casual. Let me know if you have questions. I said if you have questions, you can always email me. My card's in the back. Sometimes for a full day, I'll set more specific rules, like if you have a question, come on over and write it on the board, and at 10:45, we're gonna talk about the questions on the board. There's a lot of those kind of mechanisms in place for teaching adults because they probably know as much as you, but maybe about other stuff. I need to really respect my audience because you're a bunch of professionals also. I think that can get lost sometimes when you're doing a workshop or a class. It can't ever be one directional. This has to be a team effort, I think. Scheduling social time before the event. We've sort of introduced this rule for a lot of our meetings because it may be that you're having a meeting, having a workshop, and people in the meeting know each other, and they want to talk to each other, they want to say hi, they want to hang out. Or they are the lone archivist or the lone professional at their organization, and they don't get to talk to anybody. So the workshop gets going, and they want to talk a lot. They want to raise their hand and tell you long stories, and that's great, but you're on a sort of a timed schedule, right? So having a social hour before, half an hour of coffee, an hour of looking at an exhibit, whatever it may be, I think it's a great way to warm people up, but also lets them talk and socialize and sort of get in the mood. It really helps. Something I did not know before I started doing teaching so much. No reading the slides, literally just read that sentence at you. But that's a big one. We've all been in lectures where someone has beautiful PowerPoint slides and they just stand there and read them at you like you can't read them at the same time. I find that kind of personally, it's really aggressive. So this is for you guys to look at while I'm also over here doing something else. So I want to have some activities. I want to keep you interested. I want to have visuals. Again, it doesn't really matter what the age or experience level of your audience is there. They're intelligent working adults, so give them some things to work on mentally while you're giving this talk. To that point, I'm going to show a couple of slides that I show often when we're talking about kind of basic care and handling workshops, caring for your paper collections. A lot of these classes and workshops all kind of have the same names. You guys have seen them announced on listservs and things like that. So often I'll be talking about like the history of paper production, and we could talk about that for like 6 hours, and no one wants me to do that. But you get kind of bogged down in a lot of dates and jargon, so I'll say, okay, let's break it up. Everybody listen up, and we'll talk about an image like this. And people just shout it out, and it's a little bit obvious, but also sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know. So what's in there? Postcards, okay. Yeah, so it's a scrapbook page. Let's look at materials. What kind of materials are we looking at? Tape, the dreaded enemy. Paper, yeah, maybe some adhesive. Maybe I don't have a clicker. There's a piece of ribbon up in the middle there, so blue like a fabric. It could be a cotton, could be silk. So I'm thinking, okay, some fabrics are more acidic than others. Some papers are more acidic than others. On the right, that might be a photographic print. It might be like a mechanical print, so I'm thinking about those elements. I'm gonna pour water over myself. So it's just a chance to kind of use their brains and remind them that they are involved here, and I want them to talk back at me. Do it again. Anybody? Maybe some fabric for the binding, right, the blue part. Maybe some cardboard or some kind of board stock under the white fabric. I've got ink. I've got adhesive, right? So just to kind of mix it up and think a little about like, oh, what are we talking about? We talk about these collections. They're They're manufactured objects, so we have to think a little bit more creatively. Sometimes people get a little bit upset when I show them pictures of things, of like better or worse things, because they're like, were you in my attic? Is that our storage room? Anybody thoughts? What's wrong with this picture? This is your archival storage. Yeah, that looks bad, right? Yeah, things stay on the ground. Huge issue. If they have a flood or a leak, all those things on the ground, that's trouble. Definitely, yeah, the lighting there, perfect. Yeah. Ooh, I get made fun of for saying off-gassing so much. They're wooden shelves. Side note, wooden shelves are terrible for your library. I mean, unfortunately, they're beautiful and we all have them. But yeah, wood, it's an organic product. It's creating acidic byproducts that are bad for our collections. Sometimes when we're doing like a shout out activity, people will they'll kind of wake up, they'll like put their phones away, they'll talk to their neighbor. It's not quite a break, but it's almost like you've taken a break and everyone stood up for 5 minutes. What's wrong with this? Yeah, it's right in front of a radiator. Besides the fact that it's like a raw metal drawer, it's right in front of a heater. It's literally getting cooked in those drawers, right? Plus, maybe the books look like they're not very organized. They could probably be in some folders or hanging folders, some enclosures. There's a lot of problems here. But again, someone might start to say, oh, that looks like our office. Maybe we should think about it. It's a little bit more personalized than me just sort of like throwing facts at you for 90 minutes, right? Okay, so we're going really fast. Okay, so I want to just give a couple examples of workshops that we have done or that I've known about, and then I do want to try to open it up and hear from you all. So get ready. Starting with a favorite topic, right? Scrapbooks. Scrapbooks are so common. They are preservation problems because they are paper and binding, and then all kinds of stuff gets stuck in there. Fabric and hair and metal and maybe glued in or taped in, so a lot of concerns there. So this is actually the example I was thinking of from the point that you brought up earlier. The public library in this town was noticing that probably once a year or so they would get a donation from someone in the community, and it would involve scrapbooks or photo albums or both. They were just seeing a lot of them around, and they thought, gosh, they're always in terrible shape. They're always falling apart. But they're really useful, unique documents. I mean, what a personal story these are telling. If you want to look at a town history, you don't look at the census. You want to look at these personal photo albums with inscriptions on them. And so they know that this is an important resource. They want to continue to collect them. But they were thinking, how do we do outreach to inform the public so while they have them in their families, they're still doing a good job taking care of them. And then if they get donated to us, they're better off. So that's our topic, and that's our audience. Pretty obvious goals here that I just said. So in taking care of the objects now and in the future, it's an investment in their own collections. This is like future collection management stuff. So they decided to apply for a grant. They wanted to bring in a photo conservator to come in and teach a workshop. Maybe they could take a look at the collections too. And they knew they'd do some money. They had about $200 in their programming budget in their library themselves. And they thought, well, that's not really enough. There's no one around. We don't have a local museum. There's no one around to help us do this. We want to hire someone to come in from the state university from like 500 miles away. They thought, okay, we probably afford like a half-day workshop. So they went to the town and they brought some of their scrapbooks with them. And they said, look, we have these incredible representations of our history. Can you give us some money? We want to get some expertise on this. The town gave them some money, and they started to sort of lay out what would this day look like, a half day. Okay, it'll be a meeting and some hands-on time, and there's a room at the library, so that's free, that's taken care of. They talked about the idea of just keeping it free. You know, they'd gotten funding, why would they charge the participants? Something we've noticed, and this is for NEDCC, we've noticed, if I do a free event, I don't necessarily get a great turnout. If I charge $5, I'll have a full house. If you just have a nominal amount that people are committed, they're actually registered, they put down their email address, and they paid $5, they're more likely to show up. And I'll talk about another event in a minute, but I've done free events with like free lunch and free supplies, but because the whole thing, there was no commitment to get up in the morning and show up, they didn't come. So I support the idea of doing a nominal charge per person, or they did per family. So if a family wanted to come, then bring the parents and the kid and the grandpa, $10 gets you in. And so that actually, the extra money gave them enough to buy coffee and donuts to do that social time beforehand. Everyone came at 9:30, had coffee and donuts and hang out. 10 o'clock, the workshop started. Now, so the conservator, who's from the local university, well, sort of local, it was pretty far, they wanted to come out and stay as long as possible. And they said, okay, we're going to come for the same price, come do the workshop and stay for an extra hour or so and just be in conversation, be accessible to the families. Not to do appraisals, but to really look at the objects and say, look, let me look through the pages, tell you how it is, make some ideas. So the people were going to get not just this sort of broad education, but actually a one-on-one with a professional. I've noticed that consultants and professionals like to do this. It's like I was saying, we just want to just dump knowledge at you. We love sharing knowledge. We love making everyone do a better job. The hard part is getting the money to like get you on the airplane or get you out there. Once the person is there, I've noticed that like we all just like to stay and just pack in the day. So I'm going to come at 9 a.m. and also try and do a tour and then look at your basement, and we're going to talk about the HVAC. And people, your consultants like to share, they like to get involved, so don't be afraid to ask. And then the last piece was the scheduling, of course, finding out when they work with the instructor and the library. The library had some kind of long-standing summer programming. They had like a reading club for schools, and they had a yoga class. Like the summer is really busy. Can you come in the fall? We found a Saturday in the fall that worked for the conservator and worked for the library. Saturday after the morning, afternoons were like a lot of T-Rec practices and all those kind of things. So there weren't venue concerns because it was the library's own room. The library had the chairs, so that problem was kind of removed. But that was pretty much the planning for them. And it took meetings and phone calls and like back and forth, but it was worthwhile. In the end, they had a really good turnout, and it looks like, it has an effect. It's a sort of a ripple effect of improved care that will come around and benefit the library in the end. Example number 2. Now I'm just going to read the slides just to mess with you guys. Okay, so this is one that I did that was mostly positive. I think I learned things that we could have done better. But this was the tribe in northern Maine to do a day of hands-on education, training, bring up some supplies. Okay, so we have our topic, general preservation. Audience was just the tribe. The funding was specifically just for the tribal community, so that was great. The goal is kind of a broad, kind of what we were talking about. If you've got maybe a couple of books and a couple of photographs and you have a basket and you have some artifacts, just some general good practice rules, ideas about how to order good materials, how to do some handling, maybe how you're going to digitize these items and what does that mean. Pretty a kind of broad, basic day. This tribe had a, what do you guys call it, a TIPO? Oh, TIPO, I'm into it. I always say THPO. Who I had met we met her at a New England conference, I think like 2 years ago. And she was concerned about getting some general knowledge out to the community because they didn't have a shared repository yet, but she was thinking long term, like, okay, if I apply for a grant in 5 years to get funding for building a local museum or something, what are we going to put in it? So she wanted to start sort of informing her audience and her peers now. I think she wanted to help families feel a little bit more like pride in their heritage and pride in their artifacts. And again, you can have this idea that like historic or archival means old leather books or like, I don't know, marble busts in the museum kind of thing. And she wanted to get this idea out that your yearbook from when your son graduates high school and like the plans from when you build a new community center, all those things count, even if they're not old yet. Those are your heritage and your artifacts, and you can put them along into your collection planning alongside with older artifacts and maybe something from someone who's passed away. I'm thinking about this one boy who came. He's a teenager. I think I was probably gonna. Well, he had his headphones in like the whole morning. He was just like checked out, not interested. His little brother, super into it. His parents really into it. This kid was like, "This is boring. Why am I here?" And I don't know. I didn't really worry about it. I was like, "Yeah, it probably is boring for you. Sorry, man." And we were doing the workshop and we're hanging out and we were doing a hands-on demonstration. And I'm kind of walking around and we're all working. And he kind of calls me over. And I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And he takes his headphones out and he like literally reaches into his pocket and pulls out this piece of newspaper, like a clipping. And it was the obituary from when his grandfather passed away, I think 4 or 5 years earlier. So he's like 15 now. So he'd been like pretty young when his grandfather passed, had cut out the newsprint. And he was like, "Listen, I have this and I keep it in our gun safe." And I was like, "That's awesome. This is great. Let's talk about it." So I brought a bunch of plastic enclosures. I'm going to get like emotional about it. We talked about how newsprint is not a great material, right? It's really full of lignin. It's really weak. We talked about making a photocopy on good paper, but also saving that clipping. He's had it with him. It's important to him. Then we talked about the relative humidity in his gun safe because they're not great for humidity. So we talked about not keeping it, safes are, if it's an airtight little unit, that's not great for our paper. It was, for me, like as an educator, super validating. That was a small workshop. Not a lot of people came out for it, but that just like made my day. So I think that it works, I would say. So, such like a sob. I'm gonna cry at my own story. It's really. Okay, so in this case, the TIPO applied for a preservation assistance grant from NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. We can play the acronym game. If I don't define it, then I guess you get a prize. So I'll talk more about the NEH and this grant in a minute when we get to funding, but it's a great grant. It's very flexible. It's up to $6,000, and it's perfect for things like getting an instructor, getting some training. In this case, I was also able to get a big donation of supplies from one of the big archival vendors. They are here. They're in the hall exhibiting. I'm not going to tell you who it was. But I told them about it. I was like, "Look, I'm doing this workshop." They got the money together like barely to have me come up and do a day of training. Can you help me out? She sent 25 full-size Hollingers, like our nice heavy-duty archival boxes, with folders, plastic enclosures. I mean, it was so nice. The boxes just like kept on coming out of the truck. It was so amazing. Again, if you ask, people are pretty generous and pretty excited about doing all this stuff. We're all in it for passion. No one is getting rich in this field. So I think ask, it's worth it. When are we done? 5? Okay. So this workshop was pretty amazing, right? We had it was free for them to show up. Free supplies. I do think this is a situation where if it had been $5, we would have had a bigger audience, but that's okay. But it really felt like a good, really effective, hyper-local, this is not changing the state of collections in America, but it made a difference in this town and for this tribe, and that, to me, is good enough. So here are the slides that I started with, and I wanted to share these. I mentioned these earlier. I think it's kind of an equalizer, and yes, you may have in one room, right now we have municipal people, we have volunteers, we have an archivist, we have teachers, it's all over the place. That's always going to be the case. But specifically for a non-professional or family audience, it's that much more important to let them know, hey, you're already in this, so come with me on this journey because you're already into it. So we talk about kind of just the beginning. What's in your collection? What do we consider to be part of it? And what's this language that we're using? If I say collection or preservation, what's that mean? And again, doing it not in a scary textbook way, but just doing it in this kind of, I'm talking about the things that you have, like your grandma's cookbook. That counts. That's your rare book. So we'll kind of walk through. It's kind of a value thing, really. We'll talk about background. For an archivist, let's start with the context, right? Who produced this? Who bought it? Who sold it? Where did it come from? Who organized it the first time? Who put the first stamp or label on it? In the family setting or the non-professional setting, it's going to be more like you're really recording the names of the community that otherwise are going to disappear. So it's like, did you get this when you were in high school? Is it from a company that went out of business in town? Get that backstory. Uniqueness is something that we talk a lot about. Well, for digitization, for example, we'll talk about, is this the best copy that you're going to digitize? Again, for a family, it's maybe you've got a CD that is, of course, published and commercial and doesn't have value, but you took it with you to college, or you took it with you to Iraq, or whatever it may be. It has value to you, that's sentimental value. So it's not the only copy, but it does matter to you. Age, again, it doesn't have to be old, does not have to be 150 years old, does not have to be a bound book. It can be something contemporary and young, and that's okay. So thinking about diplomas, thinking about Christmas cards, those sorts of things. These are all kind of value considerations, but again, if it's important to you, and we talked a lot about in our workshop yesterday, the idea of what's important, mean, or valuable, it's very personal, and you can set those rules. If you're in charge of your collection, you set the definition for what's important and what's the most valuable item to you. And then we'll go into a discussion period right away, right off the bat, because I don't want them to think I'm going to stand there and just dictate to them all day. So we'll go right away and say, okay, what do you think is in your personal historic collection or in this community's historic collection? And it's interesting to see what comes up. I tend to learn something. So that's just kind of an example of how I would unpack that tier example. I'm sorry? I know. I have the worst pictures, but it's really scary. They were like, yeah, we reboxed everything. And I was like, no, no, you didn't. That's not how that works at all. I do get permission from people before I air their dirty laundry, though. I will say, I always let them know I will be embarrassing them on a national stage. Okay, and then finally the scheduling for that. So that was kind of the examples I used for that Northern Maine workshop. The last thing for that, the scheduling, was it's in really far northern Maine. So we had to schedule it before the snow fell down and I got trapped up there. Again, I think that was one that we learned a lot on because you've got to meet people at their level and make it useful. And I guess, I don't know, portable. These are concepts that can get real big and heavy. So you want just to feel like, oh, this is a fun thing I learned about. Here's a fact. I can go out and replay this fact for someone else or teach someone else about it. So there's also work that I played a lot of videos during. That's okay. It doesn't have to all be coming from me. There are some great tools out there. Okay. And then one other example of just for a funny example, this is from Massachusetts, New Bedford Fishing Heritage Center. So fishing industry, obviously very important in Massachusetts. This is one of those industries where it's the whole family's involved for generations. You're seeing these stories and skills get passed down. And of course, industries change. We've seen a huge loss of fishing jobs. So this center is sort of built, it's very much a volunteer, community level organization that does a lot of outreach and oral histories and trying to capture the local stories. This is last year. They got a Common Heritage grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. This is a great example of a partner grant. So they talked to University of Massachusetts at Amherst. They talked to the local public library in New Bedford. They talked to volunteers from a couple history majors at undergraduate history majors from local schools to set up a couple of community scanning days, kind of like you were saying, doing these community outreach days with that added piece, because it's great to do the outreach, have people come in, scan images, but then where do those images go, right? How are we taking care of those files? So the added bonus was they had these big institutional partners like a university who said, yeah, we'll take those files, we'll preserve them for you. They manage the front end, the outreach, the education, but we know the files are being backed up with a partner. So that's just like perfect. So there were some similar Common Heritage grants that went out to South Asian American Digital Archive in LA and Grand Valley State University in Michigan. It's a really wide range of applicants. It's all about doing these kind of multi-tier digital projects. I recommend that you guys check it out. Again, I'm focusing on events here, but there are these other tool sets. There are online tools. There's just regular publications, articles, books, guides. Anyone done anything? We talked about this at the beginning, but is anyone sort of thinking a publication or a tool is more effective for them than a workshop? Because I'm always curious to hear that an in-person event might not be as easily achieved. No, we just love workshops. Yeah. Okay. Worth asking, I think. Funding. Okay, so this is my last piece, and then we've got 20 minutes, and I'm happy to just hang out and hear what your actual events are and questions are. I think, again, you have more to teach each other, probably. So just to gather these resources together, again, if you want the slides, because I don't expect you to like write down these links, please send me an email. I'm happy to share slides and endless resources, and I will also help you fill out the forms. So I was talking about the preservation assistance grants at the beginning from the National Endowment. These are all National Endowment for the Humanities. Deadlines are going to range from like May to December. The PAG at the beginning there, that's a baseline grant. The funders want to see that first and foremost. It is a sort of really basic assessment of kind of the full picture of your institution, your policies, your staffing, your funding, the collections. It's not a report card. You're not going to get in trouble. It's not an appraisal. These are grants that are meant to find out where you're at and where you're going. Then you have this kind of official report in your back pocket to propel you towards the other grants, bigger grants, equipment grants, large-scale kind of capital funding grants. I put a couple of, I think, fairly relative examples up here. What's great about these websites is that they have been redesigned, so there are examples on there. The deadlines are really clear. Your funding agents and officers are around. They are humans who will answer the phone. Give them a call. They really love it. I mean, don't show up in DC, but definitely call them and email them. Don't call the day before your grant is due, but do call 3 months ahead of time and say, here's where we're at. What do you think? And they'll say, you know what? This grant actually is going to be too big for you. Start over here, or vice versa. They're going to range from like $6,000, like I was saying, to like $500,000. So there's quite, this is kind of a long-term thing. You're funding, you want to start at one level and build, and every 3 or 5 years get that next big grant. A couple of other examples of resources. On the top there, National Park Service. Those are from their Center for Preservation Training and Tech. They're more focused on historic preservation than, say, like collections preservation. And by historic preservation, I mean architecture and structures. But so often we are dealing with both. You have a historic structure, or you're on a historic site, plus you have several boxes of photographs. So worth looking at their resources. Of course, everyone is familiar with IMLS. They have a huge range of funding services available, again, ranging from like $5,000 to $500,000 or more. Watch their webinars. Everyone has a summary webinar that I promise you it's worth watching, even though I know it's a webinar and it's tedious. It's really worth it. And then at the bottom there, NHPRC, National Historic Publications and Records Commission. They've got a real focus on doing digitization. They love to fund your digital outreach today. So, you know, to look at their example projects. They're really easy to emulate, really support those ideas. And that's all I had for notes. In the back, I put some resources, some links to things, but I would love to hear specific questions from people who are like, here's a project I want to do right now, or I have no idea where to get started right now. Does anyone want to share ideas or questions? Yeah.
I just wondered, from your experience in planning these, is there an ideal number of people, an ideal size group that is most effective when you're putting these together?
Yeah. I find I end up at like 35 as a sweet spot for a lot of topics, except in the case of doing a hands-on demonstration. Like I was saying with the digitization day, we really didn't want to take it more than like, there were 2 of us, so we're like, okay, 20 to 25 people is a lot, but we can probably make this work. If we're doing like how to make oversized folders for your maps and blueprints, that's something that we could probably do 15 people in a given room. I think that you can always do a little bit fewer than you think is a good baseline. You always like plan for 5 less than you think you can actually handle, because if people have really good questions or they spill all of the supplies, either way, you're going to need that extra space and that extra time to handle the situation. So it's a great question, though. Thank you. And also keep in mind that your institutional partners, maybe you ask the local museum to host a workshop. I'm doing this with a museum in New York in a few months. I said, hey, I'd love to do a workshop in your area. Can I use your museum? I won't charge you or anyone from your staff. And they were like, great, we're bringing 10 people to the workshop. And I was like, oh gosh, that's half our attendance. And so we moved to a bigger room. So now we're gonna have 30 people, and a lot of them will be their own staff, and that's fine, that works out great. They'll probably be more willing to talk and share because they have kind of their cohort there. So that's a nice kind of a free add-on you can give to your institutional partners. Other thoughts? How about parts of like school or academic projects? Because that's something that I see as part of grants a lot. Is anyone part of an academic organization that's thinking about doing training for their students or their outreach? Yeah?
Well, I work for a small nonprofit in Southeast Alaska, and we're currently doing an enhancement grant so we can focus on our digitizing our photos
Uh-huh.
and also doing YouTube.
Oh,
But
great.
The next step that we want to do is provide workshops or hands-on for community members, for example, this.
Oh, great.
With very specific photos, and a component of it is like that we would like to teach some of our youth, our high school leadership program,
Mhm.
how they can be a part of this process by using our equipment to digitize.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, this is kind of like the next step for us a year or two out.
See, that's great because that benefits so many different groups. I mean, it's working with an existing system. You've got this teenage program there. It helps them. It also like helps the program. That's really smart, I think. It reminds me of one question I got about copyright yesterday. When you have people in the community or your peers in a company or whatever it may be they have questions about letting you digitize or handle their materials or bring them to a workshop because of the copyright issue. Is that a relevant topic to talk about for you guys? I'm seeing some nodding. I mean, yeah, ish. We talked about this yesterday a little bit. I think it's a pretty common concern. People are like, well, I have photographs and things, but I don't want you to put them, sell them as postcards or put them on the website. And doing this outreach hopefully includes a discussion about, preservation is not about just like monetizing it or putting it on the website. There's kind of different elements in play here. And as nonprofit organizations, as archives and education units, we have a lot of protections in place for copyright, so I wouldn't let that stop you as a risk. Copyright comes down to risk management, and we have a lot of safeguards in place. So if you have people with questions about copyright, know that one, if they didn't create it, they probably don't own the copyright anyway, and two, letting you help them take care of it or digitize it doesn't mean that then you have the copyright either. So. Other thoughts about topics that come to mind that you may want to pursue for doing a workshop around or something?
What would be the, like a preservation kit for like families? For our end, us would be building for our tribe the trust of the people to actually not donate to the tribe, because a lot, well, I don't know what the tribe's gonna do with my pictures.
Right.
But just being that, okay, we're not having any ownership of it.
Right.
We'll delete the files, once we scan it, we'll just put it on a file for you.
Mhm.
You take home, you can preserve this, and this is a better way for you to store your pictures or your artifacts. And I think that would be our more approach is to build that trust throughout our communities and say, hey, come in. I know charging is, we've gone through our tribe, is everything's usually free,
Right.
but then you lack that source of ownership. So
Yeah.
you just sometimes throw things away.
Yeah.
So I think if we were to do that, we would have to charge just like $5 charge just for material reasons, but just to get them that. Well, I think ours is, especially for proposals, what would be the best preservation kit and how much it would cost per family?
I think you brought up a lot of good points, actually. I think all of it, there's a couple different ideas there. One, the trust building thing, and that maybe is part of the copyright question I was getting yesterday. People do feel they have ownership over these things. They matter to them. They don't know if they matter to you. Are you going to take care of them? So that kind of outreach where like, yeah, let us help you. We're not going to keep it. I think it's education. I think it's showing up and being a friendly face over and over again, sending out a flyer, putting it on your Facebook page. I think it's repeating your message and having examples out there. Maybe you can sort of get a couple of test projects where you're like, look, we helped these people take care of their photographs and we didn't take them away from them. We didn't destroy them. We just helped them like clean them up, get them scanned, put them in a nice box. Having some examples and then let people, give it a year or so, let people advertise it for you, that's going to get you some buy-in. Towards towards the idea of a preservation kit in terms of supplies and information. So from like archival vendors, you'll see like a newspaper preservation kit or a scrapbook preservation kit. And those are generally kind of all-in-one boxes full of things that you can also just buy separately. And maybe you don't really need all those things. You could just buy a stack of acid-free paper. But I think coming up with some simple directions, and I put a couple of like, you know, no budget preservation kind of guides back there, and there's tons more on our website. Coupling like an acid-free folder and a piece of plastic, like a plastic enclosure, with information, that goes a long way. It doesn't have to be a really fancy like pair of gloves and some tissue and like one of those weighted snakes. Like it doesn't have to be too far. And you know, there's that duality of like taking care of the analog and taking care of the digital. And it is a little bit, people I think get scared when I'm like, oh, well, where are all your Flickr pictures? Or like, how is your phone backed up? And it kind of can snowball, right? So a little information to say, let's put your scrapbooks in order on the shelf. And also, let's take some photographs of them and make sure you name the files correctly and back them up. And kind of leave it at those simple ideas. Does that, I don't know if that's helpful, but you don't want to start talking about like making digital surrogates and worry about file format redundancy. Let's just start with a little bit of outreach, kind of basic concepts. Does that kind of make sense? So I would say you can throw money at this, but you could also start with like $10 worth of really basic folders and boxes or folders and sleeves. Yeah?
I would just say for the copyright, we allow the donor, anything that they're donating to us, to dictate restrictions.
Absolutely.
And that opens up the door for being like, okay, you want to restrict this from, you know, us putting it on the internet or whatever. Like, why? You know, let's talk about, and you know, it gives it to them where we're like, you know, it lets them say, okay, well, most of the time we have no restrictions. You're like, oh yeah, like there's
Right.
no restrictions on this, but it kind of just gives them an idea of like, oh, okay, like what do you mean by restrictions? And you're like, do you want us to put it online? And they're like, oh, you're right, you know, I'm not comfortable with that. And
Yeah, that's such a good point.
with a workshop for like, before my position now, I actually have my own business where I help people preserve their family history. And
Uh-huh.
I did go to like our local historical society and just went to them like, okay, so if someone comes in and they say I have these photographs, like I just went through and kind of said like, these are like Gaylord or Hollinger, or you can do this, but you can also do it on the cheap with just getting like a ring of permalite or something like that.
Right.
So just going through and doing a head research for them and just saying, here's some options for you. And I just think there's a lot out there that you can be able to just be like, here's like basic breakdown and this is how much it could cost, but whatever you do is gonna help in the future. And the cataloging thing, just saying, you know, yeah, take pictures of the object.
Yeah, just get started somewhere.
Because that's insurance too. I know a lot of people are worried about like,
Yeah.
you know, being in Oklahoma, we have like tornadoes,
Right.
and earthquakes now. And like,
Although I think like where don't we at this point, right? It's all happening. That's a great, you know, just having the information available when they're ready to talk about it. I've seen a couple of really good. So September is National Preparedness Month. So that's a thing you can like do a billboard around or do outreach around. But also the first week of May, oh God, is Preservation Week. I'm pretty sure it's the first week of May. I am on that committee. Yeah, I think so. End of April into May is Preservation Week. So often we'll see like a library will set up a bulletin board and let you post a couple of useful flyers, or an example of a form of like, if you are scanning images 1, 2, 3, this should be your DPI, save this type of file, back it up. Little kind of like, just little chunks of knowledge. It's there when they want to come find it. I think great points, thank you. Other ideas? Does it seem like pretty accessible? I mean, could you just go ahead and set up a workshop? It's pretty easy, right? Yes, some slow nods, I think, right? Okay. Well, we're a little bit early. Well, we're 5 minutes early. So I'm happy to hang out if there's more questions, and I'm loving being here this week. I'm hearing such great examples and stories of kind of these self-driven projects. So thanks so much for letting me be part of the conversation.